Good day, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Briareus Kerensky and welcome to the second part of Crimson Shadows, my Senran Kagura retrospective. In the previous chapter we left Senran Kagura riding an unexpected wave of success in Japan, and the rest of the world finally joining in on the fun after a year-long wait. Senran Kagura wasn't idling in Japan though, with a mobile game, subtitled New Wave, debuting on November 28, 2012. It lasted for nearly 8 years before shutting down in October 2020. For a mobile game, that's quite an achievement, especially when it had to share the spotlight with a second mobile game, Shinobi Masters Senran Kagura New Link, that's a mouthful, from November 2017 onwards. Unfortunately, due to the nature of mobile games, once the service stops, the game is no longer available, so I cannot comment on New Wave. I'd like to show some footage here, but none of the YouTubers I contacted for using their videos replied, so I have to use screenshots instead, and I'll leave a couple of links in the description. 2013 started well with two new beginnings. The first is Senran Kagura Ninja Flash, the anime adaptation of Senran Kagura Burst, which started airing in January. It was good fun for fans of the series, despite having average animation and drawings. Ninja Flash would reach American audiences courtesy of Funimation in November 2013, while the first manga, renamed Senran Kagura Skirting Shadows, would be published by 7 Seas Entertainment the same month. Still on paper outing, July would see the only novel ever, Shoujotachi No Seishun, published in Japan by Ichijinsha. The second new beginning are the Versus games, exclusive to Sony consoles and PCs. This sub-series consists of 3 games: Shinovi vs, Estival vs and Burst Renewal. The latter is a remake of Burst on the 3DS, but shares many mechanics with the other two, so I'll group them together even without the Versus moniker in the title. These 3 games, along Peach Beach Splash, are also considered a parallel storyline to what happens on the 3DS, although I don't quite like this concept. Characters introduced on the 3DS will appear in the Versus games and vice versa, and it's kinda easy to find a place for all the games in a unified timeline. But either way, this is how Takaki sees Senran Kagura, so I cannot really say anything else. The first Versus game, Shinovi, launched on the Vita on the 28th of February 2013. And just like the 3DS, the Vita wasn't exactly having an easy ride. In fact, ever since the handheld launched in 2011, it failed to captivate the public due to the 3DS picking up steam and Sony pretty much abandoning the console in all markets, despite being home to a ton of visual novels and some good anime tie-ins. Senran Kagura Shinovi Versus landed in this landscape, selling a combined 120,000 copies between physical and digital. The Japanese physical edition also started that kind of tradition for Senran Kagura packages, featuring small chibi figures of the Hanzo girls. Shinovi Versus, with Shinovi calling out to the Vita, almost doubled the playable characters, introducing not one but 2 new groups, Gessen Girls Academy and 5 new girls from Ebijo. Homura and companions, after having deserted their alma mater at the end of Burst, formed Homura's Crimson Squad, a ragtag group of shinobis always strapped for cash and ready to take on any kind of job. The elegant Ice Maiden Yumi leads the Gessen group, featuring the shy Murakumo, the diligent Yozakura, the vampiric Gyarushiki, and the sweet-loving Minori. Ebijo is represented by Imu, Murasaki, Ryobi, Riona, and their leader Miyabi. Imu and Murasaki are sisters, like Ryobi and Riona. The latter pair are of particular interest, first because Ryobi is a candidate for second best girl in the series, then due to their backstory. The two sisters were part of Gessen, but joined Hebijo to avenge their older sister Ryoki, who was killed by an unwilling Miyabi.
Shinovi, Tenshin!
Shinovi Versus moves the camera behind the girl's back, turning Senran Kagura in a quasi-Musou game, in which enemy waves are thrown against the player before they reach the local boss. The change in perspective feels very natural, as both normal and special attacks on the 3DS already had their own area of effect. This doesn't mean the game is without flaws, as Shinovi Versus stumbles in several areas, and if I have to be completely honest, I had better memories of this game before replaying it for this video series. Stages are larger, but this means you have to hop from section to defeat enemy waves, and this creates constant lulls in battles. Most standard enemies are also dispatched before launching them into the air for the first time, and because some stages are set inside buildings, the verticality of both stages and combat has been curtailed. If you hit enemies just right while in the air, it's possible to spam the light attack to lock them into a seemingly infinite loop, and there is no recovery time for special attacks either, allowing you to quickly deplete an enemy's life with a series of secret shinobi techniques. This is actually a good thing, because bosses in Shinovi Versus, and in fact all of the Versus games, can be downright frustrating. Bosses and mid-bosses weather most of your attacks without flinching while interrupting your combos when they feel like, and breaking your air combos with a ground stomp every single time. It doesn't help that clothes are destroyed every time someone is launched into the air, and these sequences can't be turned off, cutting into the flow of the fight. Bosses will always change into their shinobi outfits while their health reaches 50%, replenishing it and of course unlocking their complete moveset, and fighting transformed girls in later stages is an exercise in patience. The best tactic is to reach the boss already transformed with a full special gauge, bring her down to around 50%, and then quickly spam special attacks to avoid transformations. It is a cheap tactic, but it works most of the times. And if it doesn't, just ground stomp your way to victory, as no one has an answer to this deadly technique. And one thing I will always rant about in Versus games is the camera. Tansoft never created a good 3D camera for the Versus games, despite already having done so for other games they developed, like on Chambara, and even other Senran Kagura games. Just look at Peach Beach Splash. Plus, it was already 2013, so there is no excuse for having such a bad camera. On the plus side, Shinovi Versus doesn't skimp on content. The 4 factions have 5 chapters with 5 missions each, plus 5 exclusive missions for all characters. Personal missions are very funny, all of them further exploring the girl's personality. I find hilarious that Homura constantly seeks to reach the zenith of comical skits, and in Shinovi Versus she does. According to her. And this will be recalled in pretty much all games after. There is also multiplayer, a first for the series. Unfortunately, the scene on the Vita is pretty much dead, but I do remember Marvelous publishing a good number of balance patches trying to give all characters equal footing, although I also remember Mirai being one of the strongest characters because she could pin down everyone from afar. Another first in the series is the ability to strip someone completely naked by finishing an opponent with a special attack. Naughty parts will be covered by that character's SD face or by magical rays of light. Shinovi Versus would arrive in America and Europe in October 2014, once again thanks to Exceed and Marvelous. The American limited edition, while not as grand as the Japanese, featured an artbook, a soundtrack CD and a reversible cover. Next up is Estival Versus, for which we have to jump forward to March 2015. The game was published for Vita and PS4, with once again a limited edition featuring different chibi figures depending on the format. Miyabi and crew for the Vita, guest sign girls for the PS4. Estival Versus would grace American and European players in March 2016. Unfortunately, I don't have any of those limited editions, but my used copy of Estival Versus has an Australian case and a European disc. Whatever. And I want to be clear from the start, this is for me the lowest point of the main games. I didn't like the game when it came out, and replaying it now confirmed my dislike for it. There are a number of reasons for this. First, this came out after Senran Kagura 2 on the 3DS. I know I skipped it, but that was a complete redesign of Senran Kagura, while Estival Versus is just happy to elaborate on Shinovi's formula without much success. The addition of offensive and defensive wake-up options, the reinstated verticality in combat and stages, the more numerous enemy waves that allow you to string incredibly long air combos, and the newfound emphasis on air combat are all good, but other changes are not. Stages have multiple levels, which only further reinforce how stupid enemies are and how bad the camera is. It's possible to dodge special attacks with ease, and enemies can escape yours even after being hit once. Enemy Shinobi transformations are scripted, and they can happen in the middle of your combos, without them having to burst or counter in any way. And you face up to 3 bosses at once, often with one long-range character in the back pummeling you, and for whatever reason all ranged attacks now pass through walls and stagger you with just one hit. The new bombs are useless because they have a fixed range and don't track whoever you have locked, and they use the same button as heavy attacks. And I could have shown you all of this, but I already have a review of this game out, so instead I'm showing a collection of creative finishes. These are short stage-dependent cutscenes that happen when you defeat opponents in the right conditions. Unfortunately, this is the only game making use of these. Estival Versus introduces 5 new girls, starting with the 3 Mikagura sisters, Renka, Hanabi and Kafuro. Ryoki, who you might recall being Riona's and Ryobi's dead sister, is the 4th new playable girl, with Asuka's grandmother Sayuri and her alter ego Jasmine completing a new roster. They will appear in just one more console game after this, and will never get their own chibi figures in future limited editions. I find this rather unfortunate because I quite like Renka and Kafuro. ...2017 will be a very busy year for Senran Kagura, but again I want to skip forward, this time to 2018 for the Japanese release of, as of now, the last proper Senran Kagura game, Burst Renewal. As the name implies, this is the remake of the, let's say, second game on the 3DS, adopting the combat style of the Versus games. Burst Renewal debuted in Japan on the 22nd of February, with Europe and America receiving their versions in January of the following year, and Europe preceding America by a few days. The Japanese limited edition will sadly not contain any chibi figures but rubber keychains instead, a drama CD, a reversible cover, DLC for Yumi's missions, and a small artbook. Exclusive retailer versions also had other extras, like the Homura papercraft included in the AB10 package. America got 2 limited editions, the tailor-made edition with just the game, soundtrack and a bunch of DLCs. The At The Sims edition adds to that a box with an exclusive illustration and the same keychains of the Japanese edition. Europe had their own limited editions. the Bountiful Beauties, which is more or less the At the Sims edition with the same box as the Japanese version, and the digital-only Shinobi Rivals, comprising on some extra costumes and new missions. It's worth noting that the American and European PS4 editions of Burst Renewal don't feature the intimacy mode in the dressing room due to Sony's changes in content policy. This won't be the last time Senran Kagura will fall victim of such changes, but I will explore these in later episodes. The Steam version is uncut. Renewal ditches many of the changes introduced in Estival Versus and plays closer to Shinovi Versus, although with several tweaks. I think the intention was to make a more technical game. You can cancel most of your moves, enemy attacks now show their area of effect, there are less enemies but they are sturdier, and you can still happily string longer combos in stages with the same verticality as Estival. Bosses still behave like in previous games, with scripted shinobi transformations and able to ignore your attacks if they feel like it. But more damningly, Renewal deals away with air specials, something that all Versus games begged for ever since Shinovi. There is no excuse for those not being in Renewal, as they were one of the biggest new features in the 3DS burst. Senran Kagura 2 Shinku, now a 4-year-old game, had air specials as well, and special attack mechanics between Shinku, Estival and Burst Renewal are very similar. On the complete opposite, the final fight between Asuka and Orochi, which was quite poor in the original, has been upgraded to a proper final boss fight, with multiple stages and well-orchestrated attacks. It is the highlight of the game, although it's not quite enough to make the rest interesting. After playing all these 3 games back to back, I think I understand why the combat never felt as good as in the original side-scroller. The system was changed to 3D, but never fully adapted or optimized for it. The viewpoint is 3D, but the camera does a terrible job in crowded environments. Stages are multi-layered, but enemies can't quite navigate them and there are too many invisible walls. There are parries, wall running and items, but they never have an impact on how you play. There are hidden secondary objectives, but the system is not really geared towards exploration. Specials don't lock opponents in, but they can be easily avoided even after hit confirms. Bosses require hit and run tactics, but the focus of the combat system are still long combos. There are good things in the Versus games, but the unwillingness to fully evolve the system is these games' downfall. Next time I will explore the games I skipped and be prepared, because what awaits us is quite peculiar.
もう終わりか。